She lit a lantern and the dead remembered her. Lyra lived in the village of Drosmere, where the trees wept and the rivers forgot. Her home was a crooked wooden hut built on the forest's edge, warped with time. Its chimney coughed smoke like an old man's sigh, and the shutters creaked like bones. But it wasn't her hut the villagers whispered about. It was Lyra herself. They said she was cursed, born under a red moon with silver-streaked hair, eyes like twin shards of frozen lightning, too wild, too old for a child. Yet through it all, Lyra never cried. Not once. Not when her father vanished in the war of stars, swallowed by a silent sky. Not when her mother's song faded into silence, leaving only dust and echoes. Not even when the villagers threw stones and muttered, "Witch's child." Their fear clung to her like fog, but Lyra walked through it untouched. At night, while the world slept uneasily, she wandered into the forest of hollow names where even the owls held their breath. She was searching for something, though she didn't yet know what. What she found was a lantern hanging from a branch that shouldn't sway. It was gold, twisted and ancient, the glass fogged like old dreams. Its silver flame danced steady in the airless dark, waiting for her. When Lyra touched it, warmth bloomed in her chest, sudden and deep. Her knees buckled, her breath caught. A single tear fell. Her first, the London sky grey-blue. It struck the ground, and the very earth whispered her name in reply. That night she dreamed for the first time in years. In her dream stood a castle of white bone on a cliff of obsidian sorrow. Below it flowed a river glowing with soul light, silent and still. Thousands of shadowy figures knelt, their faces hidden by time. At the centre, on a throne made of weeping bones, sat sorrow incarnate. The castle pulsed with something ancient, terrible and lost. Lyra awoke with the lantern beside her, its glow now brighter, and it whispered to her through the silence, "Come, find us." She entered the forest again, this time with the lantern in her hand. The flame didn't flicker, even when sun failed to rise above the trees. No trail guided her, yet the forest opened for her like a page. Branches bowed, shadows parted, and the wind forgot its howl. The deeper she walked, the heavier the lantern grew in her grasp. The trees whispered memories, and the roots hummed with forgotten songs. Then she saw the first spirit, waiting by still water. It was a child-shaped shadow, faceless and still, wrapped in sorrow. Lyra knelt beside it, her voice small. "I see you." The lantern brightened, silver light soft as forgiveness. The spirit looked up and remembered its name. More spirits came, lost souls of all kinds, fragmented and fading. Lyra listened, she held their hands, she carried their names, and each one left a thread of memory inside her. The lantern grew heavier with every soul who remembered, but brighter too. So bright the forest shimmered beneath her feet. The trees no longer loomed. They bowed like old kings. The air sang her name in long-forgotten tongues of mourning. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. Yet she felt full of something, not sorrow, not burden, but purpose, woven from all who came. She walked until the forest gave way to a broken horizon. There, on a jagged cliff, stood the castle from her dreams. White bone, obsidian stone, towers weeping beneath a starless sky. But now the castle cried, its walls cracked, its towers bowed. Lyra stepped forward. The sky above her seemed to sigh and darken. The stars blinked out, one by one, until only her lantern remained. It flickered, for the first time, and something reached out from the castle, not to welcome her, but to test her resolve. Inside, the halls were quiet, but heavy with the weight of memory. Glowing rooms etched the walls, each pulsing with a living sorrow. She touched one, and saw her mother's face, laughing, then fading. Pain lanced through her spine, hot as lightning, then softened into warmth. The lantern pulsed in sympathy, flaring to absorb the pain. Room by room she walked, each memory sharper than the last. Her father's voice, her own regrets, the lie that love wasn't real. Each truth she faced burned a piece of her away, and gave something back. Her footsteps echoed through memory, not stone. The throne room waited like the final page of a story. A circle of cracked stone held the throne, made of weeping faces. And on that throne sat sorrow itself, crowned and eyeless. The king of the forgotten watched her without seeing, and as he opened his mouth, he wept without tears. "Why do you carry it?" he asked, voice like thunder through water. Lyra's hands trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. "Because someone must remember," she whispered into the silence. She raised the lantern high, and it burst with silver fire. Light flooded the room like a tidal wave of dawn and grief. Spirits gasped as they shed shadow and became human, if only briefly. The king collapsed, no longer a monarch, only a lost boy. Lyra caught him as he fell, his crown dissolving into dust. "I remember you," she said, and the boy in her arms wept softly. The castle sighed. A sound like mountains exhaling forgotten names. It began to crumble, not violently, but like a burden lifting. The stones melted back into earth, the sky exhaled starlight, the spirits faded into wind and flame, singing thanks with no words. Lyra stood alone on the cliff, the lantern now empty. It no longer glowed, but her eyes did, filled with new light. She turned to the forest. The vanished path reappeared, pulsing gold. Each step she took echoed with a name, a memory, a gift. The trees whispered her return, branches dancing like old friends. Where once shadows lived, blue fire lilies now bloomed, glowing soft. Their petals sang names, names once lost, now found again. She walked beneath archways of light, her heart no longer hollow. Drosmir sat unchanged, yet waiting. The village hushed as she appeared. Elders stopped playing. Elders stopped whispering. Even birds paused mid-flight. She had returned, but not as she left. Older in spirit, softer in gaze, stronger in soul. The boy who once threw stones stepped forward, eyes wide with shame. "I'm sorry," he said, voice trembling like a candle in wind. Lyra placed the lantern into his hands. Lightless but not empty. "You don't have to be, just remember," she said gently. The lantern flickered once, just enough to stir their hearts. In that flicker, every villager saw something long buried. A name, a face, a truth, a grief they had never spoken aloud. Tears came, but not of fear, of release, of healing. The dead had remembered. Now it was time for the living. Lyra smiled, and the sky began to part like curtains. Stars burned brighter than they had in 1,000 years. Snow began to fall, soft, white, gentle as spring's first breath. The world was writing a new story, one Lyra had opened. She had carried sorrow so others could carry hope. And when she looked to the forest, it bowed one last time. A story had ended, but a legend had just begun. The lantern stood in the village square, unlit, but always whispering. Every night, when the wind turned soft and the lilies hummed, it spoke. Eladork would gather and press their palms to the cold glass. They would whisper names and stories, and the flame would flicker inside. "We remember," it would say in voices layered with centuries. Lyra's footsteps no longer echoed, but the world walked in them still. And deep in the forest, fire lilies danced to her song, because even when light fades, memory never does.